Welcome to the Miscarriage Rebellion. I am Stacey June Lewis, lead of the Pink Elephant Support Network group counselling program, Grief and Grace. And along with Pink Elephant's co-founder and CEO Sam Payne, through this podcast we will share the stories of many Australians who have lost their babies to early pregnancy loss. With evidence and empathy, we unpack the shame, blame and stigma and lack of support that they may face. This is a loss that has been silenced for far too long, and we deserve better. We are here to normalise the conversation and to make lasting change. Today I'm chatting with comedian Sashi Perera, who joins us to share her journey through 4 miscarriages and a taxing course of fertility treatment. Sashi rejects the societal pressure to be sad all the time, explaining that she has used her dark humour and performance as a vital outlet for her to take control of her own narrative in this time. We discuss the relentless medical advice to just go again and the pivotal moment after her 4th loss where Sashi and her partner made the courageous decision to hit the brakes on the IVF process and prioritise her health. This episode is about reclaiming the steering wheel of your life, making peace with an unknown future and finding the question, how can we still find joy if this doesn't happen for us? So I am here with Sashi and we are really ready to have this quite a big conversation. Sashi, we discussed earlier this idea of being able to, I suppose, dictate and have control over your narrative, your story, the way that you say it. When it comes to starting this conversation, is that something that has been prevalent to you through this very big journey? Do you feel like there's been times where you've lost the ability to kind of share your view of it?
I think I'm lucky because I'm a comedian, so I have some avenues which I can use myself to broadcast my side of the story. I think what I've kind of found is that in this particular area, you're expected to be sad all the time. And I think that is something that I've really struggled with because I've thought if the ultimate marker of success is that my partner and I have a child, and anything other than that is a failure, then we must always be sad. I think that's the equation that's really just not sitting well with me, and one that I've really, really struggled with. So I've tried to write about our experience and what's been going on. And I think I'm lucky because I have my channels where I can write the full extent of what we're going through. And I wonder what that's like for people who don't have that outlet because it has really been a game changer for me to be able to take control of my narrative.
It's an interesting place to start, right? Because as you say, in some ways, there is this opportunity for you to be able to not only take control of your narrative, but also share a narrative that is very rarely shared. But then it also is really difficult to think about the people in isolation, which we've spoken to many times on this show. And I, in my work see all the time around not being able to do that. Have there been times across this journey where you have felt like it hasn't been therapeutic or it hasn't been useful?
Right at the beginning, when we had our first miscarriage, I really didn't know how to deal with it. And my partner and I, we had to go through a journey to figure out what our grieving process is because he started off as a very private person. And I have a need to talk about these things. And so we figured out that the balance was first we grieve on our own, but then I'm able to share it and the reason that we got to that place where I really needed to share it was I told him that I felt so much pressure and shame that the silence was going to crush me. And I think when we balanced out our two needs, that need to share it won, luckily, because I think if he wasn't open to that, I really would have struggled. But I would say the first miscarriage was probably the hardest one because we hadn't figured out our process yet of how we were going to navigate through it. And I'm really glad that we put supports in after the first one because we didn't know we were going to have 4 and who knows how many more we were in store for. So yeah, it was I think the first one was the hardest because we hadn't figured out how we were going to grieve separately and then together.
Yeah, it's such an interesting point. And I think that first loss not to compare them because they, it's all a very different experience of grief. But I think it is a real reckoning of very core fundamental coping mechanisms, very survival type coping mechanisms that we are first dealt with, which we know from research, but as you've just explained, can be very different from person to person. So when you're navigating that in a relationship, it's complex, and it sounds like you guys communicated quite effectively. I wanted to ask if you could take us back to the beginning and give us a little bit of a snapshot around how we find ourselves talking today and potentially what your road to conception has looked like.
Our road to conception has been an absolute nightmare with no end in sight. I shouldn't laugh, but it just,
I laugh as well because I know the feeling, like we've had ends, but I know that, that kind of in the, I was about to say F, but in the,
yeah.
that's the only way I can really describe it. Yeah, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, I feel bad laughing again, because this is such a serious topic. And I feel like for people who grieve in a very different way, it might be disrespectful. But I can only speak of my own losses and I can only speak of my own journey. And for me to not be able to treat it with humor would be disrespectful to my experience because I just I have to laugh at parts of it because other parts of it have been so hard and so difficult. So for us, our journey has been we started trying to conceive in January 2021. We were pregnant February 2021 and had a miscarriage very shortly after at our 6 week scan when there was no heartbeat. And, the general consensus, once you start speaking to people about it, is that's okay. A lot of people have been through one, you won't have another one. Then we had another one, and it was, don't worry, you won't have another one. And then we had another one. So that was 3 pregnancies and 3 losses in 1 year, which was incredibly difficult. And it really was put us through the ringer emotionally, physically, and then we were told the medical advice was, try IVF. And from the start, I said, how will that be different? Because our problem is not getting pregnant, it's staying pregnant. But the advice was it will be different. So we went down that path. We did 2 IUIs, 4 IVF transfers, and then in February 2024, we were pregnant again. Very exciting, expected it to be completely different, and then miscarried in exactly the same way. And so that was in April 2024. I said, that's enough. It's been about 3.5 years of listening to the doctors, experiencing these losses. I found IVF very difficult. I know that a lot of people find it difficult. But for me, with the hormone injections, they really messed with my brain, is what I would say. It wasn't just the physicality and just my moods. I feel like I was in a cloud for a very long time. A bad cloud, not a good cloud, a thunder cloud.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting side effect that's completely brushed under the table from personal, but also from what I see, it is a very common approach for people to say, some people get some mood swings, but nothing to be worried about. Like, it's a really interesting, yeah, approach when we know that that's not the case. So yeah, it's concerning at how little attention that part of the experience is given, even if you don't experience to the lengths that could be looked upon as extreme. It's still a very big part of the process and a very big part of your own equilibrium, really.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good way of explaining it. I was just off equilibrium for so long, and I found that the way that it's minimized, particularly for women and the effects that it has on your body, because while all this is going on, you're trying to be a good partner, a good employee, a good friend, a good sister, whatever it is, normal life continues. Everyone around you is much further on, it feels like, on their pregnancy journey and having kids, and you have to act like you're pregnant but not think about being pregnant and putting your body physically, it was all just so much. And I was happy to do it. But then when we miscarried in exactly the same way, I thought I I don't care if time's running out. So when we started this process, I was 34, and when we decided, I said that's it. I was 38, and you know, that ticking clock of you don't have time, and the advice from the doctors was we haven't found any reason for why this is going wrong. So yes, take some time off, but come right back. We're just going to get back on the IVF horse. And I said, you know what, that's enough with the horse. I don't want to play anymore. And since then, we've been having conversations about exploring other avenues, whether we've taken enough a break to try again. I really don't know where we are at. For the last year and a bit, I've been concentrating on my own health. So, nutrition, diet, balance, exercise, just feeling well after feeling horrible for over 3 years. And I have to say, I feel at a much better place now. And I'm really glad that I just hit the brakes on all of it and had a partner who understood that. I feel very grateful for that. And that's a weird thing to even say. Oh, I feel grateful for that. Being able to place myself first for a second, for 1 second.
Don't you know you're here to carry a baby? That's your role.
Do you want a baby? Shut up.
Strap yourself in because we're doing it my way. Yeah, it is an interesting situation, but no, having some form of acknowledgement to that, I think, is still a part of the picture. In that, whilst they're completely not able to be compared, there must be something very uncomfortable about wanting and yearning a child and not really being able to have a say on how that timeline looks, that process looks. I think everybody would agree that if you're doing this in a relationship, which isn't the case for everybody, that you would be hoping there's communication and open conversation. But I think, from what I would imagine would be a healthy place to be, is that your partner, is whoever's carrying, wants to support the best result and the best option for the person carrying, because that really does then contribute to the ability to conceive at all. If someone's feeling resistance, they're feeling resistance. So I think what you've just described over the last 12 months too, which is, probably a little brazen for me to use the word, but it sounds like, the way that you've described your body is moving more fertile, like actually just in terms of the nourishing, and when you think of it in the analogy of planting a seed, or the kind of gardening analogy, which often can be brought into this, because it is relevant regardless of whether we want to be mindful of not being of simplifying or being insensitive to the fact that it sounds simple. It is a really interesting thing that in this conversation you've raised that, because yeah, when it is complex and it is heartbreaking and there is a lot on the line, those simple parts of the picture can sometimes be avoided to be discussed. You know what I mean? Because there's this kind of really big pressure and this big picture that apparently IVF is often the only thing that is supposed to give us the outcome we want.
Yeah, and I think over the last year, we've been forced to confront, okay, what if this doesn't happen? How can we still be happy, and how can we still find joy if this doesn't happen for us? And I think confronting that question and thinking, okay, what else do we have in our life? Can our relationship survive that? What does that look like? That has been a really freeing journey, because that means I don't have to keep putting my body through this until we have a baby. It means that we will consider all the factors together. We might keep trying for a little bit longer and then say, you know what, that's enough. We're just not going to have a kid. And I think one of the hardest things about that has been sharing that with our network, because I think there's a fallacy out there that everyone who wants a child has one. And that's just not the truth. And that's what you start learning. And what really helped me is that I started reaching out to women who were much older than me, 10 years ahead. And whether it was by choice or by circumstance, they didn't have children. And I'm just really, really grateful that they gave me so much of their time. But speaking with them and having conversations about them, about how it's totally fine to want something, make your peace with not getting it, which a lot of us in society have to do. There's heaps of us out there who don't have something that they really want, and then find other avenues of joy. And for me, that was one of the most freeing things to learn, that whatever happens, whatever avenue we go down, life is going to be okay. It felt like just taking the foot off the accelerator and just thinking, okay, this is going to be okay.
Interestingly, though, the analogy I got as you said that is this beautiful ability to hold the steering wheel too. So if we're using that analogy, you've taken the foot off the accelerator, but I also kind of had this visual of you holding your own wheel, because I think what happens a lot in private practice when people are going through a point where they're continuing to move through IVF and it's not working, there comes a point in a lot of the sessions and a lot of the different clients I've worked with where I ask the question if they've consciously thought about choosing this, even though they say to me, I'm doing everything I can. And I have to really kind of very softly and appropriately raise the question of whether there is still a conscious decision for these actions, because we can move through this process really unconscious and really, well, I'm going to keep going and I'm going to keep going. And now we've lost the ability to ask ourselves at what cost. And we've lost ourselves, and it happens. It's very, very common. So I think, yeah, that analogy that you've said and so poignantly not only done, but communicated is this, yeah, ability to grab that steering wheel of your life.
I think also, I love that we're rolling with the car analogies. This is really fun. But I think one of the huge issues that I found was that the cost, it's not just the financial cost. I think the cost, especially on the body, on the relationship, on the mind, it's just not counted because it's, oh, but this is the cost for a baby. Do you not want a baby? And so it takes a lot in your mind to work through that to say, yes, I want a baby, but I also value myself. I really value my relationship. I really value my mental health. And this is this is getting to a place where it's actually it's going to all collapse if I keep chasing this thing. So I think that you have to look at the reality of the cost and what it's costing you and be honest about that and whether it's something that you want to proceed with. And deciding that's enough is a different point for every single person. No one has the right to tell you to stop, and no one has the right to tell you to keep going. You very much have to make that decision consciously yourself, I think.
Yeah, I think it's so well put. And I think to add to your point, the cost is going to be different for you than it is for the next person. I think that's the very, very difficult acceptance piece, is that someone's cost might have been a blink of an eye and another is a life commitment of financial, emotional hardship, and so we can sometimes really resist the acceptance of the reality of your cost or our cost, and I think it's difficult as well when somebody wants to talk about your plans off the basis of what it costs them. So, when people are talking to you about decisions you're making and their cost was, if we have to use these enough, but it was kind of a more accessible, affordable in many ways, less taxing cost, then of course the advice and the conversation is going to be very different from a person that hasn't had this ginormous tax or expense. And I don't necessarily mean just financially, I mean on everything in your life. So being really mindful of what that cost looks like and how it may never look like your sister or your best friend or, the people at work. The cost, unfortunately, is very different for many of us.
Yeah, and I think that it's a struggle to talk about it openly as well because everyone has that unicorn person, they really struggled, but then they got there in the end and just keep going. And I don't think people realize how many people don't talk about it. So you might have that success story, but that might be against 100 stories where they didn't get what they wanted and then moved on with their lives and found other avenues of joy. Uh, I don't think people are only, they realize that they're only hearing the success stories. Even with IVF, it's like, oh, we thought we were done, but then we got pregnant and it was fine. And then that's when you hear the story. So I just think that there are many stories of a different kind of success that are just not shared.
Yeah, and going back to your point at the beginning, that success is seen if you have the baby, But, we know the statistics of postpartum stress, postpartum depression, disassociation, PTSD that come with this. It isn't, yes, some people might also meet their baby, but that doesn't come without a very big cost as well. So those elements are very much not discussed because you got the prize, and yeah, I think a lot of people find it difficult to have that conversation, especially when people might not get that, prize of the baby. But it is a part of the conversation that we're having today because it is the reality. It doesn't all work out the way, I guess, society will have us believe.
It doesn't. And I think it's also, very well known and publicized. Parenthood is difficult. And once you've gone through this journey and tried so hard to have a child, I think some people also, as you said, feel really guilty about even discussing how difficult it now is because they think about, oh my gosh, but look at what we went through to get this child. And it's all of those feelings are valid. It's very, very clear and well documented how hard parenthood is. And you're not negated from talking about that just because you got your miracle baby.
This is exactly experiencing now. I've got a 1-year-old and 3.5 years to get him, and obviously building a business and the guilt that comes from my life choices because I have him and he might not be with me all the time. It is all consuming, and I'm in the thick of it in this very moment. So it is a really what's the word, it's sticky. It's really sticky.
It's really sticky, and but also it really feels like I try to talk to as many friends as possible about this. And I try to hold space for the ones who are pregnant, the ones who have kids, and I know that a lot of them feel guilty when they talk to me and they mention how difficult things are. And honestly, what's become very clear to me is that it doesn't matter what stage of your life or what situation you're in as a woman, you're just going to feel like you're failing. Think the world is kind of set up that way. And I think once you click onto that, it makes everybody feel better and we're all allowed to share. No one's out there thinking, I am slamming this. And once you realize that, it makes everything so much easier.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to that conscious decision making too, like that alignment, that check in with yourself. Because if you continue to check in, like if, as I just shared, moving through decisions for my career, it feels right, it feels aligned for me, it feels aligned for us. And so all of the things that you just explained in terms of, no, it's never going to feel like you've got it, girl, fucking yeah, you're doing it all. But if you come back to that kind of deep check in with you, okay, this is right for me. And that comes back to these decisions of whether you stop IVF, whether you continue to choose to have breaks. This is the other thing that we haven't really touched on that I'd love to hear more about your take, is that there is also this very fast moving process that the fertility industry, but also society has us moving in. I think that is somewhat contributed to the ticking clock, but I think it's also about this. When someone makes a decision to have kids, it must be now. There's no time for people to pause, even in between children, if you're lucky enough to experience that. There's this whole race to kind of have them out as quickly as possible if you are able to have them. And if you're, even with miscarriage, it's like, well, apparently if you just had a miscarriage, you try again, you're more fertile. Anything that moves you towards speeding the process up. How did you kind of advocate for yourself, even if it was you and your partner, or even in your own conversations, your solo conversations with yourself, to have the courage in the face of all of that to stop and pause, maybe not even to know that you were going to stop IVF, but just to give yourself a minute to decide?
Honestly, I never think of it as courage. I feel like I get pushed to a place where I feel like it's something I can't not do. I understand that's a double negative, but it's the only way that I can describe it as because I just think there's so much guilt and that whole fast, 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 go again, go again, go again. And I think I just get pushed to a place where I say, okay, I can't do that. I'd really like to, but if I do, the cost, I will cave. Um, so I think that's the feeling that I really, really listen to, and it's a voice that gets louder and louder. And especially after the third miscarriage, because the second one was never supposed to happen, and the third one was never supposed to happen. And even after the third one, the advice was, wait for your next period and then try again. And I actually went to the Red Cross to donate blood 2 months after, or something like that. And, the questions that they ask you, the mandatory questions they have to ask, one of the questions was, have you had a miscarriage? And when I said yes, they said, you can't donate blood for 6 months because your body needs the chance to recover. And just something went off in my head when I thought, I'm seeing a private specialist. After the second miscarriage, we moved to a private doctor. And I thought, why is it the Red Cross that is the first place that's telling me to take a break, that it's okay to rest? They're not talking at me about geriatric pregnancies and loss of egg quality and things like that. Just said, you have been through a lot. You need 6 months for your body to recover. And I think ever since hearing that, I have really been checked into, when is this okay to stop? And I think after the fourth miscarriage, because a miscarriage is not just one day in time, the mental load, the physical load, all of that. I got to the point where I just didn't want to go to the bathroom because I was so sick of seeing blood. Like, you're allowed to take a break. And I knew that it wasn't going to be the medical advice that told me to take a break. So I had to create my own factors around that. So it was between me and my partner where we narrowed it down to, can we keep doing this physically, emotionally, financially? And to be honest, financially and physically, we probably could have kept going. But after the fourth miscarriage, emotionally, I just knew my mental health was in a really poor state. And I was really worried that pushing it any further would mean that I actually would find it really, really difficult to get back to a place of stability and just feeling well about myself and my body.
Yeah, I think it's interesting all the things that you just described, and then from your perspective, you identify that as kind of coming to a almost a breaking point, to paraphrase, but you get to this part of your road where you're pushed. Whereas as an observer or listening to you speak like that, to be able to stop before you fall, to me, is courage because the advocation of yourself and just even the sheer I guess surrendering or trust, or and maybe those are words you wouldn't use, but just being able to just stop is, I think, in some ways, is a courageous act when everyone is telling you otherwise. And also, it means you have to look at yourself. It means you have to look at the truth. And I think that in general and in life, that is quite a brave thing to do. I think it might feel not like that's something you identify, but I observe that as a brave act. And I think I observe it as a brave act for anybody that stops and asks themselves, well, what do I need truthfully rather than what I want? Because I think we really can, as women, whilst we might be not told, as you mentioned, that we're winning all the time, we can endure a lot. So it can be sometimes to our detriment just how much we can move and not stop. And I'm not talking, may or may not be talking about personal experience, but I feel like, yeah, I think it can certainly, yeah, be harder than it sounds, and yeah, I really admire that part of your story. On those pauses, or in those pauses, and that decision, how did you approach the grief, or how did the grief approach you?
I think in the pause, so April 2024, we made the decision not to go to kids' parties. That was a really good decision, just because generally at kids' parties, everyone who has a kid is running after their kid. So often Charlie and I would find ourselves just talking to each other, and we thought, well, we can do this at home, and it's okay to not put ourselves in this position. Baby showers, I decided I wouldn't go to anymore. And the thing is, because I've been so open about it, my friends understand. And that has been a huge gift, that they have all been very kind, understanding, supportive, and very, very gentle, And in the time that I've been trying to get pregnant, I've had friends who've had two kids, and they always message when they're pregnant. They say, no, this is difficult news for you. I just didn't want you to find out in a group announcement. And it's all so kind, but it also sends me into a bit of a tailspin. But now I know that those feelings will come, and I'm prepared for them. I give myself the space to be sad, but then I'm always really happy because then it does move into a space where I think, okay, wow, there's going to be a new person in the world, and that's really exciting. And so I do get there, and that's a nice thing to know. But being able to kind of cotton wool myself from the initial feelings and be able to deal with that on my own or with my partner is really nice. And it doesn't have to be real life, watching television shows where people announce that they're pregnant, where they go into the labor scene, and you think, oh, wow, I grew up thinking this would be me, and it might be a reality that I don't get. And you have to sit with that and confront that and think, how bad do you really, really want this? And yeah, so all of that is incredibly complex to navigate. And it's not easy. I would say on some days it's super easy, some days it's super hard. And on the super hard days, I just make sure to be extra kind to myself, do things that make me really happy, and then normally focus on what I can do because I don't have a kid. And I don't know, spend some money, go shopping, go do something really nice.
And when so I hear that you're giving yourself opportunity to be sad. I think that's one of the things that I'm picking up, that there are kind of in brackets, but there are pockets where you protect that feeling and don't necessarily, whilst you try and help yourself in it, you feel it. So I'm hearing that. In terms of the actual losses in that time, did you kind of get to the fourth loss and then start to process, like, because we've spoken about that go go go, particularly the 3 in 1 year would suggest that it was a lot at once, which sometimes does take us to a place of just kind of disassociating or staying very focused. Did you find that came to find you, or did you notice that you had the pocket of sadness, or what was able to sit with the grief in it?
I think when I was going through it, it sounds so ridiculous to say, but basically the miscarriage started and I was going straight into 14 shows in a row at the Melbourne Comedy Festival. And luckily, the content of that show was completely removed from what I was going through on a daily basis, which meant that I could step on stage and for 1 hour I got to laugh in a room filled with people, and that was the complete antidote to what I was going through during the day. So it was very much, I don't think that would have been like that for everyone. Probably different people grieve in different ways. But for me, having that 1 hour that I really looked forward to, adrenaline hit, dopamine hit, get off stage, go home, have a big cry. That in the moment worked for me because I think without it, I would have just kind of shut myself out in the house for 2 weeks or a month or whatever it was to really just grieve it. But it did just mean that I put off the grieving process properly. So I think I was disassociated, getting through it, having a great time on stage, great time at the shows, and then was very much just kind of in get through this period mode and then create the space to grieve later. So I very much delayed it.
We actually talk about this a lot in our bereavement program. I run a group therapy program for pink elephants, and it's called the dual processing model of grief. So there's restoration process, which is that keeping busy, moving through life, trying to human and be functioning, and then there's loss oriented. And I think for those that are listening, it might also be useful to you, Sashi, but it doesn't mean you're not grieving. I think that's one of these kind of myths, that when you move through a busy time or continue to show up for work or finish a project, it doesn't necessarily mean the grief stops. It's just a different form of dealing with it at that time. So we talk a lot about this because I think it also then is helpful to contribute this to relationships, because it means sometimes you might be in more loss oriented, they might be in more restorative oriented grief, and it doesn't necessarily mean one is grieving more than the other in our own process, but also in those around us. So I think, it is an interesting point that is often missed, because in society we're told that we have 5 stages, and if you're not feeling any of those, then it must mean it's not there. Whereas we know, with a lot of research on this particular experience, that that's just not the case. That that dual process is a very big part of how women move through this. And it's all evidence based. It's not, this isn't just a thing that we've picked up to, it's convenienttheories.com for us. It is actually, it is tried and tested. So I think it is important, that we are all aware of that, because it can mean that sometimes we think we switch on and off, which then creates a resistance or creates a discomfort as well, which isn't always the case. People can disassociate. Like, there is also that as a completely separate thing.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you mentioned the duality. And I think what has surprised me as well is the longevity of it as well. Like, I'm talking about a loss in April 2024. It's now September 2025. I started watching Sex and the City again, and I've bashed through the seasons to the episodes where, Charlotte's desperate to get pregnant and Miranda is pregnant. And anytime they have a conversation about it, which shows that they're really holding space for each other, I just start crying. I start weeping at the unfairness of the situation, but the acceptance that both of them are moving through. And it's just, it just surprises me a lot. It's a TV show. I already know what happens. These people are not real, and I am weeping. And I just give myself space to do that, because I think, okay, somewhere locked away in my mind, this is still part of the grieving process, and I'm still not done, and that is okay.
Yeah, and I think it's an important part, because it's, if you do move into that restoration, sometimes the loss needs to be tended to, and we really need to look at both of them as, exactly that, being tended to at different times. It's not always going to be possible for us to sit in loss oriented. So then, if you find the moments, then your body is naturally processing. But it is funny, I think, again, funny, but I feel like age, with the use of that term. It is funny when you look back and even see those themes, the clothes they're wearing, is it like 90s, early noughties, all of the stuff that came out about how, like, out of touch they were, blah, 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 all that crap now, 20 years later, that we're looking back at it with, and I say crap, I mean just kind of the zeitgeist conversation. Some of it was relevant, I guess, but it's very hard to have a conversation about a show that was filmed before anyone knew half of the things that we're thinking about now. But I think, off the back of that, what I'm trying to say is that those themes are real. That friendship and the duality that you described is, I think, often very hard to articulate and represent. So I think when you see something like that, as dated as it can be, it cuts, because it's not seen. Like, we don't see representations of that very, as you so beautifully put it, moving through the unfairness and accepting it in each other. Like, I feel like that's a challenge for most people to do. It's a, for me, it's a sign of true love. But I feel like, it's just not something that is articulated or shown in story commonly, if ever. So, God, of course, it's like they're in front of you on a TV. Time to let it in.
Yeah, yeah. And I think so much of this has been accepting the unfairness, it's not fair. And that has to be okay. And I think having seen my father during this whole nightmare, my father was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, passed away within 4 months of his diagnosis, just after he retired. And I've lost friends along the way who've passed away, and you just see the unfairness that people have to go through. And it just is. And you have to find a way to be okay with that and move through that. And I think it's just helping. This mindset is helping, that where, for me, it's unfair. All right, next. Move through it.
Yeah, and I think moving into this kind of wrap up of the conversation, I guess, asks for where you find yourself today, and how you manage your days in terms of that coming back to your, I guess, consciousness around today? And do you find yourself almost kind of going into that narrative fairy tale land for a few months and then you find yourself having to come back and put your hands on the steering wheel again? Or is that something that you work on daily to find and what I'm trying to say is find that advocate and consciousness in yourself to keep deciding what the next move is for you? Is that a daily thing, or does that kind of come and find you, like you've said in previous examples on the show today, that you might be led there?
It's very much been, if not a daily occurrence, at least a weekly occurrence where my partner and I, we check in with each other, because what we have also been doing over the last year is looking into other options. So looking into adoption, voluntary surrogacy, commercial surrogacy, and we've kind of met with lawyers and on each of those options and realized that is a completely different version of pushing stuff up a hill. I won't swear on your lovely podcast, but decided very much that for us, we've looked into each avenue and it all looks really difficult, very time consuming, very emotionally rinsing. And we've gotten to a place where it's kind of those alternate avenues are not for us. And so if it doesn't happen naturally, and if we don't give IVF another go, that's kind of it. And I think confronting that, sitting with that, seeing how much that bothers us, is still very much a thing that we're navigating through. We're still quite fresh with that. And I think it's very hard for us and our community that they don't realize how hard the other options are. Like adoption in Australia is incredibly difficult. International adoption is incredibly difficult. Surrogacy, I had a friend offer to be a surrogate in Perth, and I'm based in Melbourne, and the lawyers, the doctors, the counselling, the approval from boards across states. I just thought, you know what? I want to enjoy my life. And all I need to do is tell myself and know from my partner that we gave it everything we had, and then we're ready to shut the door. So I think, yeah, that's very much going to be our journey for the next few years. I think knowing that we did everything that we were capable of doing, and then very gently shutting the door and dealing with what comes after that.
Yeah, and you've just opened up a whole new box of real assumed knowledge around these extra avenues. When people say adoption, I remember first looking at adoption and being on that moment, and we all know that time where you start to Google that, you start to look into, you're looking at countries, and you're checking down, you're getting deep, right? And you're like, wow, this is, I remember where I was actually on the couch, and then seeing this box that said parental age must be 42 or 45 years and under, and my heart just coming out of my throat, because my husband was older than that. He's older than me. So just all of this kind of what people assume is the next step, or what even I assumed could have been the next step, which ends up almost being this like ability to not avoid feelings, but kind of continue to hold off the conversations that you've raised today, which is, where does this road end? For me, that another thing was taken out of our choice. It wasn't even, it just was almost too much. And so I think it is really important that we add this, that if you have a friend or you have someone in your life going through this, there's so much education we give through the charity and on this podcast around conversations. But I think the biggest thing is this assumption of knowledge around these very stereotype ideas of not just conceiving a baby, but how it looks if you can't, and what that looks like for people, because those options aren't always options. And in Australia, as we know, and as you mentioned, it's basically untetherable. It's just not an option. This kind of adoption story we're told what's that show where they have the triplets? Like, there's all these stories in America.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
From Friends.
yeah,
Yeah, that's right.
these adoption stories, it's not the reality in our country.
It's not the reality. And look, there's policy and legislation around for a very good reason. And if you want it bad enough, there is a way to make it happen, but you have to want it really, really, really badly. And you have to be prepared to throw a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of emotions at something that has very gray outcomes. And that was just another path that I could not walk down, to be honest. I turned to my partner and I said, if you really, really want to do this, I can. I'm in this with you. But both of us thought, you know what? I think we're going to be okay, just us.
Yeah, I think it can sometimes be presented as the rosier end option, like this kind of idea of, oh, well, if this doesn't work out, there's always this, when actually it has its own intricate challenges and almost kind of, well, nothing is given. Like, there is no kind of handed situation in those scenarios, even with that money, time, and legal strain, as you've mentioned. And so we've spoken a little bit about, or you have mentioned a bit about a fuller life, or the life that you've thought about in terms of what that looks like for you. You've spoken to women that have walked these steps, whether that has been a choice or not, ahead of you. When you think about life, and when you and your partner have had these conversations, what does a conversation look like that, and what are the things that were brought up for you guys that either felt hopeful or challenging?
We had some really challenging conversations, honestly, where, in the beginning, because there's so much focus on the woman, and, it's your diet, it's your exercise, it's your age, it's your eggs, it's your uterus, it's your fiber, there's just so much. And I did sit with my partner and I said, if you really, really want a child, I might not be able to give you that. And we need to talk that through. And if, I don't want you to resent me in 10 years' time. And, if you want to go down another path, I understand. Like, those were really difficult conversations to have. And having him say, no, we're going to figure out what it is we can do, meant the world to me. And so what we did instead was thought, okay, there's a lot we can't do because we don't have kids. What can we do? So the last year I was born in Sri Lanka. I've lived in Australia for 20 years, and this year we went to Sri Lanka for 4 months and worked from there, and that was amazing. And we've just done so much travel. We've spent so much time with our family and our friends, and if everything works out for my stand-up comedy tour next year, we'll be on tour for a lot of next year. And I think we're just really focusing on, okay, what can we do because we don't have kids? And I think reaching out to new communities, not ditching our old friends because they have kids. It's more, there's a lot of time. That's the reality of it, time that we can't spend with our friends with kids. So reaching out to hiking groups and community groups of people who are child free or childless. And I don't know, that's not, I don't understand the term childless. I understand child free by choice or by circumstance, but just kind of celebrating what our life is as opposed to only focusing on grieving what our life isn't. I think those two things can happen in duality. It doesn't have to be one or the other.
Yeah, and it's coming back to that beginning conversation of the fact that you can feel sad and you can laugh, and both of them are allowed, and also for you have been medicine.
Very, very much medicine. I think if I didn't have my comedy, I don't know what I do. I would really struggle because comedy kind of exposed me to a whole wide age range of people between 18 and 65 living lives in very, very different ways, not just the one way. So I think that helped a lot.
Mm, yeah. This has been such a lovely conversation, and I say that word because that's how I feel, and I think I'm sure you constantly have people really tiptoe around words, and um, just kind of constantly being really mindful. But I think it's safe to say that you are adult and a big girl enough to be able to understand that when I say lovely, I mean the interaction between the two of us.
Yes.
I also wanted to just acknowledge the path you're walking and have walked, and really, really, really am thankful for you talking about it today.
Thank you for creating this space. It's honestly really important, and it feels, yeah, I would agree, just lovely to be able to chat about it, just very frankly and directly.
Today's episode may have brought up some feelings that you need some extra support around, and that's totally okay. Head to pinkelephants.org.au to access our circle of support, your space where you can be met with empathy and support through all of your experiences of early pregnancy loss. We're here for you. You're not alone.